Mel Gibson has never been one to hide his feelings, and over the years, he's built a reputation not just for his iconic roles, but also for the very public feuds he's had with some of Hollywood's biggest names. Today, we're counting down the 5 actors Mel Gibson hated the most, the ones who pushed his patience to the breaking point, clashed with him on and off the set, and in some cases, never spoke to him again. These aren't just rumors. These are stories backed by interviews, on-set accounts, and Hollywood insiders who saw the tension firsthand. We'll start with an actor who nearly walked off set because of Gibson's intensity. Move on to a co-star whose political views sent sparks flying between takes, and cover a legendary performer who refused to ever work with him again after one explosive argument. We'll reveal the actor who once called Gibson impossible in the press, and the star whose feud with Mel turned into a public war of words that tabloids feasted on for weeks. From on-set screaming matches to icy award show encounters, this list will show you a side of Mel Gibson that's far from the charming characters you've seen on screen. And when we get to number 1, you'll see why their working relationship was doomed from the start, and how the bad blood between them still lingers decades later. Stick around, because this isn't just a list. It's a deep dive into the grudges, betrayals, and personal clashes that made Mel Gibson one of Hollywood's most famously combustible personalities. Number 5. Joe Eszterhas. If you know Hollywood screenwriting, you know Joe Eszterhas, the man behind steamy blockbusters like Basic Instinct and Showgirls. On paper, he and Mel Gibson should have been a match made in cinematic heaven. One of the most bankable screenwriters of the 90s paired with one of the most bankable stars of all time. The project that brought them together was The Maccabees, an epic historical drama that Gibson wanted to direct and star in. It was supposed to be the story that would cement his reputation not just as an actor, but as one of the great directors of his generation. But what actually happened was something closer to a Hollywood Cold War. At first, things seemed promising. Gibson invited Eszterhas and his family to stay at his lavish Costa Rican estate while they worked on the script. It was paradise, until the working sessions began. Eszterhas later described Gibson as moody, unpredictable, and prone to explosive rants. The atmosphere shifted from creative excitement to walking on eggshells. The real breaking point came when Eszterhas turned in his draft of the script, a sweeping, gritty story of faith, rebellion, and sacrifice. Instead of praise, Gibson allegedly unleashed a tirade, calling the script garbage and accusing Eszterhas of not understanding the heart of the story. Eszterhas, in turn, accused Gibson of never intending to make the movie at all, claiming that the real reason for the delays was Gibson's personal scandals and his reluctance to take on such a high-profile project while his public image was in flames. What followed was one of the ugliest public feuds of Gibson's career. Eszterhas released a blistering open letter, accusing Mel of being filled with rage, using anti-Semitic slurs, and making disturbing remarks about various public figures. He even claimed that Gibson once hinted at violent fantasies about people he disliked. Gibson fired back, calling Eszterhas's allegations utter fabrications, and accusing him of using the controversy to deflect from having turned in what Gibson considered a subpar script. The fight went public in a big way. TMZ got involved, audio recordings surfaced, and the press had a field day dissecting every angry word. The fallout was swift. The Maccabees was shelved indefinitely. Their professional relationship was destroyed, and both men walked away with reputations further tarnished by the whole ordeal. Eszterhas never worked with Gibson again, and the bad blood remains one of the most documented actor-writer feuds in recent Hollywood history. For Gibson, the Eszterhas clash wasn't just a creative disagreement. It was a reminder that his temper and his blunt honesty, the very traits that made him such a magnetic presence on screen, could also turn potential collaborators into lifelong enemies. And for fans who had been hoping to see the Maccabees, it became another what could have been lost to the wreckage of one of Mel's most explosive feuds. Number 4. Leonardo DiCaprio. On the surface, you might think Leonardo DiCaprio and Mel Gibson would have mutual respect. They're both Oscar-winning actors, they've both worked with legendary directors, and they've both had long careers filled with box office hits. But behind the scenes, a short-lived collaboration turned into one of those Hollywood Cold Wars that insiders still whisper about. The tension started in the early 2010s when Gibson was attached to direct a Viking epic, a bloody, large-scale historical drama, something in the vein of Braveheart, but darker and far more violent. DiCaprio was in talks to star as the lead, a ruthless warrior in the brutal northern world of the Dark Ages. At first, both sides seemed thrilled. Gibson respected DiCaprio's acting chops, and DiCaprio respected Gibson's eye for epic storytelling. But almost immediately, the problems started. Sources close to the production claimed Gibson's vision for the film was too extreme for DiCaprio's taste. Gibson allegedly wanted the violence to be shockingly realistic, pushing the boundaries far past what studios were comfortable with. And while DiCaprio isn't exactly shy about dark material, he's worked with Martin Scorsese on some of the grittiest films of his career. Insiders say this project's level of brutality crossed a line for him. The bigger issue, though, wasn't just the script. It was Gibson's public image at the time. He was still dealing with the fallout from multiple scandals, and DiCaprio's team worried that being associated with Gibson could hurt his own reputation, especially during award season. Remember, DiCaprio was still chasing that elusive Oscar back then, and any negative press could have been damaging. As meetings went on, Gibson reportedly became frustrated with what he saw as DiCaprio's hesitations and constant input on the script. He wanted a fearless commitment to the role. DiCaprio wanted assurances about the tone, the content, and how it would be received. At one point, according to a production insider, Gibson told a mutual acquaintance that DiCaprio was all talk and, quote, not willing to get his hands dirty. The Viking project eventually collapsed, and neither man has spoken publicly about why, but the whispers in Hollywood say it wasn't just creative differences. The two haven't worked together since, and people close to Gibson say he considers the whole thing a waste of time. What's interesting is that DiCaprio has never badmouthed Gibson in the press, but he's also never mentioned him, never praised him, never even acknowledged the project. For an actor who's worked with almost every major director in Hollywood, that silence speaks volumes. And for Gibson, who thrives on passion and commitment from his collaborators, the experience likely reinforced something he's admitted in interviews. He has no patience for people who don't throw themselves into the work completely. The Viking epic could have been a masterpiece, a combination of Gibson's raw, uncompromising directing style and DiCaprio's intense performances. Instead, it became just another, what might have been, lost to clashing egos, bad timing, and two men who simply couldn't get on the same page. Number 3. Winona Ryder. Mel Gibson's feud with Winona Ryder is one of those that started quietly but became public years later. And when it did, it was ugly. For decades, Ryder kept the story to herself, until an interview in 2020 where she decided to tell the world exactly what happened. According to Ryder, the incident took place at a Hollywood party in the mid-90s when she was still in her 20s and Gibson was at the peak of his career. She says they were talking casually in a group when the conversation took a sharp turn. Ryder claims Gibson made derogatory, anti-Semitic comments toward her, remarks that left her stunned. As the daughter of a Jewish father, Ryder says she was deeply offended, but what really shocked her was the way Gibson delivered them, casually, almost as if he thought it was a joke everyone would laugh at. She also alleged that Gibson made an offensive remark to a friend of hers who was gay, doubling down on a night that she says left her shaken and furious. For years, Ryder says she stayed silent about the incident because she didn't want to cause a Hollywood storm, and Gibson was such a massive star that speaking out might have ended her career. But time changes things, and in 2020, with conversations about prejudice dominating the entertainment industry, Ryder decided to tell her side publicly. The moment her interview was published, it lit up social media. Gibson's representatives immediately denied her version of events, calling the story, quote, 100% false, and insisting that Ryder was lying. They claimed she was misrepresenting what had happened and twisting an old exchange into something more sinister. But Ryder didn't back down. She said she had nothing to gain by lying, and only spoke up because she felt it was the right time to be honest about an experience that had bothered her for years. Whether you believe Ryder's account or Gibson's denial, the damage was done. Ryder's story spread quickly, adding another chapter to the long list of controversies attached to Gibson's name. What's telling is that Gibson and Ryder have never worked together before or since, and given the way the story blew up, it's safe to say they never will. For Gibson, it was yet another example of how his off-screen behavior could overshadow his talent and achievements. For Ryder, it was a chance to reclaim a moment she felt had been buried under Hollywood's habit of protecting its biggest stars. And for audiences, it became a cautionary tale. No matter how famous you are, the things you say can stick with you for decades, waiting for the right moment to come back into the light. In the grand scheme of Gibson's career, the Winona Ryder feud might seem small, just one night, one conversation, one incident. But sometimes, that's all it takes for two people to write each other off completely. And in this case, the fallout lasted for more than 20 years before the public even knew it happened. Number 2. Timothy Dalton. Timothy Dalton is best known for his turn as James Bond in the late 80s, but his career spans far beyond tuxedos and martinis. He's a classically trained actor with a reputation for precision, discipline, and a certain no-nonsense approach to the craft. On paper, he and Mel Gibson seemed like they could have been a great pairing, both intense performers, both capable of commanding the screen with a single look. But when they ended up working on the same project, sparks flew in all the wrong ways. The trouble began on the set of The Doctor and the Devils in the mid-80s, a period drama that brought together a cast of serious actors and a director who wanted authenticity at all costs. Gibson and Dalton had very different working styles. Gibson thrived on spontaneity, improvising lines, changing the energy of a scene on the fly, and often pushing co-stars out of their comfort zones. Dalton, on the other hand, was meticulous. He liked rehearsals, preparation, and sticking to the script. At first, their differences were just that, differences. But over time, the tension became impossible to ignore. According to crew members, Dalton found Gibson's on-set behavior distracting, even disrespectful at times. He reportedly told a mutual acquaintance that Gibson treated the shoot like a game, while he was trying to treat it like serious theater. Gibson, never one to take criticism quietly, allegedly started mocking Dalton's rigid approach behind the scenes, making jokes that didn't stay private for long. The friction came to a head during a particularly intense scene where their characters were supposed to have a heated argument. Dalton wanted to follow the blocking they had rehearsed. Gibson decided in the moment to break it entirely, stepping into Dalton's personal space and delivering his lines inches from his face. Dalton didn't flinch, but the glare he gave Gibson after the director yelled "cut" reportedly could have frozen the air. After that day, they kept interactions to a minimum, speaking only when necessary for the work. In interviews years later, Dalton was careful with his words, but when asked if he would ever work with Gibson again, he gave a tight smile and said once was enough. For Gibson, the feeling was mutual. In a later conversation with an entertainment journalist, he admitted that Dalton took himself too seriously and hinted that their clash was inevitable because, in his words, we're just wired differently. They never collaborated again, and both men seemed perfectly fine with that. While the feud never escalated to shouting matches or public insults, it was the kind of quiet hostility that leaves a mark. For the crew who saw it unfold, it was a study in how two brilliant but very different actors can bring out the worst in each other. And for Gibson, it became yet another name on a list of talented people he simply couldn't connect with, no matter how much potential there was on paper. Number 1. Tom Hardy. When Mel Gibson met Tom Hardy, he saw something of himself in the younger actor: raw talent, a rebellious streak, and a fearlessness on screen that was rare in the modern Hollywood machine. The connection happened when George Miller was casting Mad Max Fury Road. Gibson, who had originated the role of Max Rokitansky in 1979, wasn't going to reprise the part, but his legacy loomed over the project. Miller invited Gibson to meet Hardy as a sort of symbolic passing of the torch. Publicly, Gibson gave Hardy his blessing. Privately, things were different. According to multiple people close to the production, Gibson felt Hardy didn't understand the soul of Max, that he was approaching the role as a surface-level action hero rather than the haunted, broken survivor Gibson had built over 3 films. Gibson reportedly told a friend, "He's got the body for it, but not the scars," a remark that made its way back to Hardy. From that point on, Hardy seemed determined to prove himself, but not to Mel Gibson. He wanted to prove he could outdo him. The problem was, Hardy's time on Fury Road was already fraught with tension between him and co-star Charlize Theron, and Miller's unconventional directing style left Hardy frustrated. In interviews after filming, Theron described Hardy as challenging and admitted they clashed constantly. Gibson, watching from the sidelines, allegedly saw Hardy's behavior as proof of what he'd said from the start, that Hardy wasn't ready to carry Max's mantle without letting his ego get in the way. The real breaking point came at a private industry screening of an early cut of Fury Road. Gibson attended, sitting a few rows behind Hardy. Sources say that during the screening, Gibson made several low, sarcastic comments to his companion, particularly during scenes where Hardy's Max was silent or brooding, a key element of Gibson's own interpretation of the character. After the screening, Hardy approached Gibson in the lobby. No one knows exactly what was said, but witnesses described it as, quote, tense and borderline confrontational. Hardy later gave a diplomatic answer when asked about Gibson in the press, saying, "Mel's legacy is his own, and I'm doing my own thing." But off the record, crew members said Hardy had no interest in ever speaking to Gibson again. Gibson, for his part, has never publicly trashed Hardy, but he's dropped enough cryptic comments in interviews to make it clear the respect isn't mutual. When asked in one interview what he thought of Fury Road, Gibson smiled and said, "It's a different take," before quickly changing the subject. For fans, the idea of a clash between two actors who share such a similar intensity is fascinating. But for Gibson, it was personal. Max Rokitansky wasn't just another role. It was a piece of his identity. Watching someone else step into those boots and take the character in a direction he didn't approve of wasn't just a creative disagreement. It was a symbolic fracture. The Hardy feud stands out because it wasn't just about ego or clashing work styles. It was about ownership, legacy, and the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the next generation isn't what the previous one hoped it would be. And for Mel Gibson, that realization clearly left a sting that's still there today. From fiery public feuds to quiet grudges that have lasted decades, Mel Gibson's career is proof that Hollywood relationships can be as explosive as any action scene. These 5 names represent just a fraction of the people he's clashed with, and whether you side with Gibson or his former colleagues, one thing's certain: Mel Gibson is a man who leaves an impression for better or worse.